August 14, 1959, 116th Street and Lenox Avenue. The heart of Harlem. Broad daylight. 300 people on the sidewalk. A man named Tango had publicly disrespected the most powerful black man in organized crime. Bumpy Johnson's reputation was on the line. His territory. His authority. And standing 10 feet away from Tango was a 29-year-old from North Carolina named Frank Lucas, holding a .38 revolver pointed at his skull. What happened next would echo through Harlem for 50 years. The crack of that gunshot split the afternoon air like thunder. 300 witnesses saw it happen: street vendors, shopkeepers, women pushing strollers, children playing on stoops. Every single one of them would later tell police the same thing. I didn't see nothing. For decades, when old-timers talked about Frank Lucas, long before the heroin empire, long before American Gangster, long before Denzel Washington made his name a household word, they always came back to this afternoon. This was the moment that separated Frank Lucas from every other hustler on the streets of Harlem. This was the test that Bumpy Johnson never asked him to take. This was the sound that made every Italian crew south of 96th Street understand something they'd been slow to learn. Harlem wasn't for sale, and Bumpy Johnson's new right-hand man wasn't playing by anybody's rules. What nobody knew was that Frank Lucas had made a decision that morning, a decision that would either get him killed or make him a legend. He chose legend. This is the true story of loyalty, street justice, and the moment that announced to the underworld a new king was rising in Harlem. But to understand what happened on that August afternoon, we need to go back to the beginning, back to North Carolina, back to the moment that created Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas was born in 1930 in La Grange, North Carolina, deep in the segregated South, where black boys learned early that the system wasn't built for them. By his own account, Frank watched his cousin get murdered by the Ku Klux Klan when he was just a child. That moment broke something inside him, and it built something too. By 14, Frank was running small hustles. By 16, he'd moved up to armed robbery. And by 19, after leaving a man bleeding outside a pool hall over a gambling debt, Frank Lucas left North Carolina for good. Destination: Harlem. Now you need to understand what Harlem was in 1946. This was the center of Black America, the cultural capital, the economic engine, and underneath the jazz clubs and the churches and the brownstones, there was a shadow economy worth millions. The numbers racket, policy banking, protection. And at the very top of that pyramid sat one man, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. The streets called him Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster, he was an institution. He'd been running Harlem since the 1930s. He'd gone to war with Dutch Schultz and survived. He'd made deals with Lucky Luciano and honored them. He'd done time in Alcatraz and came back stronger. By 1950, Bumpy Johnson controlled more territory than any black criminal in American history. And here's the thing about Bumpy that made him different. He lived by a code. He protected the people of Harlem from outside predators. He funded churches. He paid for funerals. He made sure that if you stayed out of the game stayed out of your way. But Bumpy had a problem. He was getting older. He needed someone young, someone loyal, someone who didn't flinch. Enter Frank Lucas. According to multiple accounts, Frank met Bumpy through a mutual connection in 1952. Frank was 22 years old, hungry, and absolutely fearless. Bumpy saw something in him. The older man started bringing Frank along, teaching him, testing him. First, Frank was a driver, then a collector, then an enforcer. By 1958, Frank Lucas was Bumpy Johnson's shadow. He carried his bags. He opened his doors. He sat in the back of every meeting, watching, learning, memorizing every face. But Bumpy had never seen Frank truly tested. Not in a way that mattered. That was about to change. Now here's where it gets complicated. In the summer of 1959, a new player arrived on 116th Street. His name was Tango. Some say he came from downtown. Others say he drifted up from Philadelphia. What everyone agreed on was this. Tango was big, loud, and didn't seem to understand how things worked in Harlem. Tango started running a small gambling operation out of a storefront on 116th Street, right in the middle of Bumpy's territory. At first, nobody paid him much attention. New hustlers came and went. Most of them learned quickly or disappeared quietly. But Tango wasn't most hustlers. Within weeks, Tango started talking, and what he said got back to Bumpy. According to street accounts, Tango was telling people that Bumpy Johnson was finished, that the old man had lost his edge, that anybody could walk into Harlem now and take what they wanted because Bumpy was too tired to stop them. But here's the thing, and this is what made the situation explosive. Tango didn't just talk. He started collecting protection money from businesses that had been paying Bumpy for 20 years. Small amounts, $50 here, $100 there. But it wasn't about the money. It was about respect. In the underworld, respect isn't a feeling, it's a currency. The moment other players believe you've lost control, you've lost everything. Word spreads, rivals circle, allies reconsider their arrangements. When Bumpy heard about Tango's collections, he said nothing. He simply nodded. But Frank Lucas was watching, and he was calculating. What Frank didn't know was that Tango wasn't alone. According to later accounts, Tango had connections to a crew from downtown, Italian associates who were testing whether Harlem was still off limits. Tango was their probe, their experiment. If Bumpy let Tango operate, they'd send 10 more just like him. Frank understood this instinctively. He'd watched Bumpy's dealings with the Italian families for years. He knew the unspoken agreements. He knew that every arrangement was built on the understanding that Harlem belonged to Bumpy. One crack in that foundation, and the whole structure could crumble. So Frank Lucas made a decision without telling anyone, not even Bumpy himself. He was going to close that crack, permanently. But here's what nobody knew. Frank Lucas had been studying Tango for 3 weeks. He knew where Tango ate breakfast. He knew where Tango played cards on Tuesday nights. He knew which woman Tango was seeing on the side. And most importantly, Frank knew that Tango carried a pistol in his waistband but rarely had his hand near it. Tango relied on his size and his mouth. He was 6'3", over 200 pounds. He'd never met a problem he couldn't intimidate away. That was about to be his final mistake. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that explains everything about who Frank Lucas really was. According to Frank's own account years later, he could have handled Tango quietly. A dark alley, a basement, a car trunk. The traditional methods, clean and deniable, but Frank understood something that most street soldiers never grasp. In the underworld, how you solve a problem matters as much as whether you solve it. If Tango disappeared quietly, the message would be muted. People would whisper, speculate, but there would be no certainty. Frank Lucas wanted certainty. He wanted every hustler in Harlem to know exactly what happened. He wanted every Italian crew downtown to hear about it before dinner. He wanted the story to spread so fast and so far that nobody would ever test Bumpy Johnson's territory again. That meant doing it in broad daylight. That meant witnesses. And this is where it gets crazy. On August 14, 1959, around 2 in the afternoon, Frank Lucas walked up Lenox Avenue carrying a brown paper bag. Inside that bag was a .38 revolver. The street was packed. Vendors selling everything from vegetables to bootleg records. Kids running through fire hydrant spray. Old men playing dominoes on card tables. Frank spotted Tango outside a barbershop talking to 3 other men, laughing loud, taking up space. Frank didn't hesitate. He walked directly toward Tango. No hiding, no looking around. Just straight forward like a man walking into his own living room. According to witnesses who later spoke off the record, Tango saw Frank coming. He knew who Frank was. Everyone knew Bumpy's shadow. Tango smiled. Maybe he thought Frank was there to talk, to negotiate, to deliver a warning from the old man. Frank stopped 10 feet away. He reached into the brown paper bag, and Tango finally understood. His smile disappeared. His hand moved toward his waistband, but it was already too late. Frank raised the .38. Now, what happened in the next 3 seconds became the most analyzed moment in Harlem street history. Different accounts describe it differently. Some say Tango tried to run. Some say he froze. Some say he actually laughed and said, "You don't have the," he never finished the sentence. The street goes silent. Frank Lucas stands 10 feet from Tango, the .38 revolver raised and steady. 300 people on 116th Street. Nobody moves. The afternoon sun beats down. Somewhere a radio plays Dinah Washington. A child's laughter echoes from down the block, then stops, as if even the children sense what's coming. Tango's hand is frozen halfway to his waistband. His eyes lock onto Frank's. For 1 second, maybe 2, the 2 men exist in a space outside time. The entire block holds its breath. Frank Lucas doesn't say a word. No threats. No demands, no explanation. He pulls the trigger. The crack of the gunshot splits the afternoon air. Tango staggers backward, clutching his head. His massive body crashes through the barbershop window behind him in an explosion of glass and blood. The echo bounces off the brownstones, rolls down Lenox Avenue, fades into the hot August air. Frank Lucas lowers the gun. He looks around at the 300 witnesses, vendors, shopkeepers, mothers covering their children's eyes, old men frozen over their dominoes. According to accounts, Frank didn't run. He didn't hide the weapon. He simply turned and walked back up the street the way he came. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody said a word. The body crashed through that barbershop window, and it was like the entire neighborhood made a collective decision in that instant. They understood what had happened. They understood why, and they chose their side. When police arrived 17 minutes later, they found Tango's body, the shattered window, and approximately 150 people within eyeshot. Not a single one of them had seen anything. Heard a loud noise became the standard response. Might have been a car backfiring. There was a crowd. I didn't notice. I was looking the other way. Detectives canvassed the block for 3 days. They interviewed barbershop customers with glass still in their hair. They questioned vendors whose tables had been splattered with blood. Nothing. No witnesses. No weapon. No case. The official file would remain open and unsolved, but on the streets, the story spread within hours. By nightfall, every bar in Harlem was talking about what happened on 116th Street. By the next morning, the story had reached downtown. By the end of the week, it had traveled to Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit. Frank Lucas had announced himself. The immediate aftermath was electric. According to multiple accounts, Bumpy Johnson didn't speak to Frank about the incident for 3 days. When he finally did, he called Frank into his living room, sat him down, and studied him in silence for a full minute. Then, according to Frank's own retelling, Bumpy said just 5 words. "You understand what you did?" Frank nodded. Bumpy nodded back. That was it. The conversation was over, but everything had changed. From that day forward, Frank Lucas wasn't just Bumpy's driver or his collector. He was being groomed as an heir. He sat in on meetings with the heads of other organizations. He negotiated directly with representatives from the Italian families. He made decisions that carried Bumpy's authority. As for the downtown crews who had sent Tango to test Harlem's defenses, they got the message. For the remaining years of Bumpy Johnson's life, not a single outsider attempted to establish operations north of 96th Street without express permission. The gunshot on 116th Street had drawn a line in blood, but the legacy of that moment extends far beyond the immediate power dynamics. When Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack in 1968, collapsing in a Harlem restaurant, the question of succession was already settled. Frank Lucas had been preparing for 9 years. He took control of Harlem's underworld within weeks, and the empire he built, it would dwarf anything Bumpy had ever constructed. By the early 1970s, Frank Lucas was running a heroin operation worth an estimated $250 million per year. He had pioneered the direct importation of product from Southeast Asia, cutting out the Italian middlemen entirely. He owned apartment buildings, nightclubs, businesses. But every empire starts somewhere. Every legend has an origin. For Frank Lucas, it started on an August afternoon in 1959, when a man from North Carolina proved to 300 silent witnesses that he understood the oldest law of the streets. In the underworld, respect isn't given, it's taken. And once taken, it must be defended publicly, immediately, and without hesitation. The barbershop window was replaced within a week. The bloodstains faded from the sidewalk. The police file gathered dust, but the story never died. 50 years later, old-timers in Harlem still tell it. They point to the spot on 116th Street. They lower their voices. They shake their heads. And they remember the name of the young man who walked up in broad daylight, carrying a brown paper bag, and changed Harlem forever. There's a lesson in this story that the history books won't teach you. In certain worlds, in certain times, silence speaks louder than words, and action speaks loudest of all. Frank Lucas understood that truth at 29 years old, and it carried him further than anyone could have imagined. If you want more untold stories from the Harlem underworld, the real legends, the real players, the real history, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Frank Lucas's position that day? And if you've got a story you want me to cover next, let me know. This is the real story, not Hollywood, the legend.